Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming to the session today, the 9:30 session at the Amazon Theater. And today we're going to talk about Industrial DataOps, the unified namespace, and how Gousto has been able to revolutionize their operational landscape using new technologies to drive operational efficiencies. I wanted to start out by introducing myself. I'm John Harrington. I'm the Chief Product Officer at HighByte. And to give you a little bit of introduction about HighByte. HighByte is a software company. We're based in the United States. We're really focused on enabling companies to drive digital transformation. The way that we do that is focusing on the data piece. Data is critical to digital transformation, and delivering data at scale that's usable, of high quality, is the key part of that digital transformation and getting the value out of it. So HighByte has customers across 18 different countries. We have customers across a wide range of industries in manufacturing, from automotive and consumer products, to food and beverage, to industrial products, pharmaceuticals, oil and gas, chemicals, wide range. We don't find any industrial vertical that doesn't need industrial data ops. But what we do find is we need mature companies who are looking to digitally transform, and then we can guide them on their journey. So what's the challenge today? Why can't we just run AI on our data and just deliver all these results? The challenge is that the data is challenging to work with. We have lots of pilot projects are going on. People are experimenting with Gen AI. They're experimenting with machine learning, with all these different projects with dashboarding and providing data to the business. But they're struggling because the techniques and the tools in place do not scale. The techniques that the initial pilot is working with are very manual. They're pulling data from different pieces of equipment, they're adding new sensors, they're pulling it out of systems, they're pulling that together, and they're in many cases sending it to the cloud, to AWS, which is who we're partnered with here today. What they find is these projects are valuable. They can extract value out of them, but when they look at how they scale them, they realize that it costs too much to scale this across their entire factory or their entire enterprise. And they realize that we need a new approach to moving data and to working with data. And it's not so much the connections. A lot of people think it's a protocol issue. It's a connection issue. That's not the problem. We have tools and technologies to solve that problem. The problem is the data. Now, if you look at the slide here, and you look at the right-hand column, and everyone in this audience looks at that, they can probably have a good understanding of what's going on. We're looking at a data set about a pump. The pump is in a brewery. It's in Portland. That's Portland, Maine. That's where I'm from, where HighByte is located. And we're collecting some telemetry data on that pump, and we're also pulling together some information about who the vendor was of the pump and when we last serviced the pump. Now, that's an excellent data set to run machine learning on. It's an excellent data set to provide as a dashboard to the maintenance operator so that they can understand what's going on and how the pump is operating. The challenge is getting there, because our data starts on this left-hand side. Our data starts with data tags from PLCs that are poorly described. They're not standardized. And in fact, although I'm only showing 2, you probably have 1 million in any large factory today. 1 million data tags if you were to scrape all the data out of every PLC on the factory floor. So the key is to pick out the data that you need and add context to it. First, we contextualize the individual data, and then we contextualize it into payloads that are logical payloads that are put together to get us to this. And that's really where the challenge is on driving digital transformation at scale, because we need to be able to do this at scale very quickly and very efficiently. And then we need to be able to manage it. Because as soon as we deliver this data to the data scientists, they're going to ask for more, or they're going to ask for different. So we need to have a highly agile and highly scalable approach to it. This is what has been coined in the industry as Industrial DataOps. It's putting together a practice within your organizations of solving this data issue, of curating data for consumption, bringing together the team. Now, the team for industrial data spans the IT and the OT. It spans even into the business. It's pulling those business functions in who need the data. It also introduces new business practices within the OT domain. So the IT domain may have used things like data governance and data contracts in the past, but those are terms that are generally foreign to the OT teams. So we need to utilize the practices that we've developed in IT with the OT teams, with the OT systems, but we also need some new systems to put in place. We need intelligent data hubs to move data. We need unified namespaces to make data accessible and usable. And we need to do this all together in an agile methodology. And that's really what Industrial DataOps is about. So I talked about a unified namespace, and unified namespace is being widely discussed in industry today. So I figured it would be important to do some education on what it is. First off, it's not magic. It's very simple. Namespace, if we break down the term unified namespace is just the structure of the data within a system. So in a SQL database, the namespace are the tables and the columns of those tables. So it's the structure, the data structures. The key is the first part, which is unified. And unified is about pulling data together, it's about standardizing it, and it's about making it useful. And then we need to pull all of that together, not just individual data sets, but the whole set of data together into a structure that the business users can utilize and get access to. So a common design pattern for the unified namespace is using an MQTT broker. An MQTT is a fabulous technology set which allows you to use its pub sub, so publish and then subscribe, so users can subscribe to whatever data they need. And it also gives us a topic structure that we can structure our data. So we're able to easily structure the data using the ISA 95 structure, which we're all very familiar with. So site, area, line, cell, asset. And we put the data in there that's relevant to that level. So for instance, at the site level, we may have profit and loss. We may have schedule. At the line level, we may have things like OEE, or schedule, or lot data. At the work cell level, we then may have compliance information, or electronic batch records, or things like that, data that we need to collect at the work cell level. And then at the asset level, we may be doing predictive asset maintenance. So the key is that at different levels, you have different abstractions of data, and data needs to be pulled together. It's not just the asset data. It's the line data or the cell data that you need to pull together to make it usable. So how does this look? Well, if we think about a unified namespace, we start with an MQTT broker. And then we need to create that data payload. So here I've got a payload for a conveyor that's focused around process status. So I pull together a series of data points and I publish that into my UNS. Well, my next step is to pull together a series of other data payloads and publish them into my UNS. So now I'm building up this UNS. The key is that I'm getting value. Every time I put a new data payload in there, we can extract value. Because the business user who needed that data can start working with it. They can subscribe to it and they can work with it. And it becomes this powerful mechanism to working with data. And by putting it into the UNS, we can store that data, we can historize it, we can produce reports on that data. We can just make that data usable and accessible to the team. Now, a lot of people are using an MQTT broker, But I also consider any data storage mechanism as a UNS. So you can make your data lake a UNS. By standardizing the data and landing it in the data lake, you can make that your UNS. You could make Snowflake your UNS. In the OT domain, we're seeing a lot of adoption of the MQTT broker because there's a lot of systems that support MQTT to consume that data and to visualize it. But in the business domain, we're seeing people using tools like Snowflake or like S3 or Sitewise so that they can land the data in AWS and then they can make use of it. To me, that's all a unified namespace. It's unifying the data, standardizing it, making it highly accessible for business users to perform their needs. So how do we build that UNS? Well, that's where HighByte comes into play. So HighByte has a solution called the HighByte Intelligence Hub. And the HighByte Intelligence Hub is a data hub that collects data. It makes connections to lots of different systems. But the key is not so much the connections, it's the ability to ingest all this industrial data and then deliver it to where it needs to be. The Intelligence Hub and the HighByte team is very focused on industrial. So although you could use this outside of the industrial domain, we're solving all of the problems that a typical factory would have. Scaling across multiple factories, data governance, all of that. Now, if you take it down a level, you get into the data pipelines. So the hub is really the structure at which we create data pipelines. So here you can see a data pipeline where we're consuming data and we're manipulating it. But the key is on the right side. Contextualizing data is about the consumer. You can't contextualize data without knowing how it's going to be used. A set of telemetry data points need to be contextualized very differently if they're used for asset maintenance versus if they're used for quality versus if they're used for sustainability. And so the key when you start these projects is to understand the use cases that you're trying to solve at a high level, and then identify where do you want to solve that use case. Maybe you're using AWS. You want to land the data in the data lake, and then you're going to provide applications to your users. And then you identify what data do they need and how do we get it there? How do we source it and how do we transform it? And so the Intelligence Hub provides you the tooling to be able to consume that data and do any sort of data transformations and interact with multiple different systems to create those highly contextualized data sets and deliver them to the target system at scale across an entire plant and then across multiple plants and be able to standardize those data sets. Now with AWS, we have a powerful partnership because with HighByte, you're able to land data in many different services in the AWS cloud. It's not just, you can certainly land it in IoT Core, and we'll hear that Gousto is using that to land data. But we can also land it directly into IoT Sitewise. We could buffer the data and create buckets, or create files and then land them into S3 buckets. We can also land it in Redshift or even up into Snowflake. So with AWS, we support multiple different services to get them the data so that the business can solve business problems. Now I want to transition to talking about a use case. So Gousto. For those of you who aren't familiar with Gousto, it's a UK-based company. It's focused on producing online meal kits. So they create meal kits and deliver them. And you can imagine when you're creating meal kits, you need to be highly efficient. You're getting lots of different products, you're bringing them in, and you need to package them up, you need to ship them out, and you need to, operational efficiency is critical. Gousto needed to have better understanding of what were their business metrics, and then how do they drive to higher efficiencies. So Gousto undertook a project, and they contacted HighByte, and they started working with HighByte to help them deliver that data up to the AWS cloud. Instead of me talking about how Gousto has done it, I'm going to invite Matthew Venter up onto stage. Matthew is the solution architect from Gousto, and he's going to tell you a little bit about the Gousto use case.
Can they hear me? Thank you very much, John. So Yes, I'm from Gousto. I'm a solutions architect. I've been here for around 2 years now, and for the past 2 years, I've been leading our efforts in industrial IoT. I think it's important to first start off that when I joined, one of the first things we did, which has really been, setting the foundation for us, was we did a maturity assessment. So we looked at all of our existing plant floor technology, what systems do we have, what common problems were we having. We worked with operations, engineering, and there were a few things that really popped up. So number one was we had a wide array of systems. We had PLCs that was installed by various vendors. We were very reliant on third-party equipment vendors to essentially provide us with data and information. We had CMS systems that were completely not integrated. And in addition to that, we had dark areas of the factory where we had little to no visibility. And that was really causing performance issues when it comes to site availability, site performance. So post-maturity assessment, we actually developed an initial target architecture. And one of the key aspects within that architecture is adding an abstraction layer between all these underlying systems and Gousto. And that's where we started really working with HighByte to fill that void within our UNS. So if I look at the UNS as a whole, we see it as two main elements. Number one being the abstraction layer, which is HighByte, and the second element is AWS IoT Core, which is our AWS entry point, and that's acting as our MQTT broker. So really by moving toward this, we've actually been able to decouple our systems, and the way I term it is we've essentially been able to lift our factories into the cloud with scalable event-driven architectures. And once the UNS is placed, we can then shift focus and say, okay, how do we start building peripheral products around the UNS to start driving efficiencies in performance and availability? So we see the UNS as really a foundational aspect that provides so much foundational indirect value to the company. And then we can start implementing things such as SCADA, MES, and we treat those as distinct digital products. So this is more of a detailed reference architecture where we are currently, and I think something very important to note is just over a year ago, none of this existed apart from some of the PLCs and the CMS systems. So we've really been able to move at pace using best-in-class tools such as HighByte, various services from AWS. If I think of some of the HighByte features that have really allowed us to scale at a rapid pace, we've used things such as templating where we're able to essentially paste in parameters into HighByte, connect to thousands of data points. We use dynamic referencing a lot, so as John showed earlier, we use an ISA 95 topic structure. All that information is essentially mapped into our MQTT broker. And this has really sort of laid the foundation for us to start building peripheral products. So we've got things such as reactive maintenance, we've got proactive maintenance products. We're also running Ignition on-prem, which is connecting directly to IoT Core, pulling across all that data. It subscribes to data, it creates information, and it publishes back in. And I think also something important to note within HighByte that we're using is a lot of the pipeline features where we're doing a lot of data transformation. So from an Ignition's perspective, we sort of transforming the spark plug data into flat MQTT, and then all of that is automatically mapped into IoT Core. If I sort of delve slightly deeper into the cloud perspective, so we're using services such as Kinesis. If you look at all the data that goes into our UNS, specifically IoT Core, all that data is automatically mapped into our data lake. So we have data engineering pipelines that feed that data into our data lake. The UNS is really acting as the single source of truth for real-time data and information, but at the same time, our data lake acts as like a real source of truth for all of our data professionals. And then we're able to essentially do reporting off of our data lake. We build data products within that. I think something also important to note is that with this architecture, we've placed a specific emphasis on not only operational efficiency, but building self-aware dynamic systems. So if you look at Monitron, for instance, we could have a reliability engineer going into the factory tomorrow and installing 30 Monitron sensors. And essentially all that data and information will automatically be mapped into our UNS, and then it will be available in our data lake in near real time. There's no dependency on software engineering or data engineering to do that work. So all of that is really automated. So we place a big emphasis on using these sorts of architectures and products to drive operational efficiency, but at the same time we place a big emphasis on internal productivity, reducing BAU, and focusing on things that really matter to our customers. So with that, I'll be handing back to John.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Matthew. Just to kind of highlight a couple things that he just said. The scale is tremendous, and the ability to scale quickly, the ability to pull the information together, the ability to contextualize it and deliver it to the cloud, that's where the value is for them. That's where they've been able to drive value for their business. that's what Industrial DataOps is all about. And with our partnerships with AWS, with Snowflake, with Deloitte, we've put together a project or a solution called the Industrial Data Fabric. And the Industrial Data Fabric is about utilizing HighByte to collect the data, contextualize it, and deliver it to the AWS cloud, exposing that into Snowflake, and then utilizing this consulting services of Deloitte to be able to scale this out in your companies, in manufacturers across the globe, because Deloitte brings a global footprint, it also brings a global consulting team that can not only do the IT work, but can also do the education work to the business functions on how to utilize the data. So this has become a very powerful partnership for HighByte. And if you need to learn more about HighByte, we have a booth here on the AWS pod. Also, Snowflake has a booth, and then Deloitte is also right across the way. So happy to speak with all of you. We have a lot of information on our website. We have a lot of information on our YouTube page, and feel free to link in with me, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you very much, and thank you, Matthew, for supporting and talking about the Gousto use case. We'll now take questions if anyone has any questions. Matthew will join me on stage, so if anyone has questions for him, they can also ask.
By doing the integration in Gousto, what was the most challenging part of this challenge?
This is the most challenging part for Gousto.
I think that the first part was really about proving to the business about this foundational value that the UNS can provide. So I think one of the things that we did really well was initially we did a lot of POCs and MVPs where we worked in a simulated environment, essentially had multiple workshops with various stakeholders across the business and essentially started showing them the power of the UNS itself using best-in-class tools like HighByte, various services from AWS. I would say the second thing that was the most challenging was really the wide array of data sources. So we've got CMS systems, we have to consume using REST APIs. We've got OPC servers. We've got various transactional databases. Also, the one thing in fulfillment is you'll notice that warehouse management systems and warehouse control systems are heavily integrated into your day-to-day operations. So there's a wide array of systems with varying transactional workloads.
Yeah, we find, every company is unique. And for some companies, it's identifying the right use cases to get started with. For other companies, they know the use case, they know they even know where the data is, but it actually, like people say, well, how long does it take to deploy? And one of the biggest bottlenecks is actually the IT infrastructure, getting it, mapping out all of the different firewalls, the different networks, the different systems that we're connecting and pulling that data through. So people will say, well, how long does it take? We have one customer who was able to deploy an entire factory, predictive maintenance, in 30 days. Before they used Intelligence Hub, he had figured it would take him an entire year to deploy that factory. So we're seeing a 10 to 12x acceleration because we're able to consolidate the approaches, standardize that data, and deliver it. And it also makes you much more secure and much more maintainable. Any other questions?
Hello. Can you give some insight into the typical user who's using HighByte inside of your facility from a configuration development perspective?
Yes, certainly. So I think it's a combination of not only our OT professionals, so control systems engineers, factory systems engineers, but at the same time, we've now started rolling this product out to our data engineering professionals. So they're very clued up on building data engineering pipelines. And a lot of the use cases within HighByte now that we're seeing is moving away from traditional building code and building things from scratch. And we're actually allowing our data engineers to essentially build the features within HighByte itself and build those pipelines natively.
We're definitely hearing a lot more data engineering roles and solution architect roles or data architect roles in the projects. And I think 10 years back, those roles didn't even exist in the OT domain. And now we're seeing data engineers and solution architects or data architects getting involved, architecting the data, and then the controls engineers maybe doing the data mapping. But they're the ones that are defining the models and rolling out the systems. Anything else? Well, thank you all. Really appreciate you coming. And like I said, we have a pod. HighByte has a pod. Matthew's going to be here a little bit longer today, and then he's going to be walking the show. But we appreciate you coming, and we'd love to keep talking and keep the conversation up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean.